department to give talks on their work and their research. Avi and I, my name is Sophia, are this year's coordinators, and we have our very own Dr. John Vandermeer to kick off this year's seminar series once again. So John is the Asbury Distinguished University Professor and Arthur R. Bernal Professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. He's also a professor in the environment at the University of Michigan. He teaches 3 courses on food, energy, and environmental justice, also the ecology of agrosystems and complex systems in ecology. And his research applies recent advances in complex systems to focus on the biological, social, and political aspects of the agro-ecosystem, particularly in Puerto Rico and Mexico. His love for his work is evident in the fact that he's always writing. He's authored over 16 books and over 250 scientific publications. And moreover, as a political activist, John is a founding member of the New World Agriculture and Ecology Group, a member of the Science for the People organization, and a founding member of the Sustainable Food System Initiative at the University of Michigan. And today we'll hear about the community structure of a natural enemies network on a coffee farm in Mexico.
Thank you, Sophia. I think we're having some technical difficulties, although that's kind of cool, isn't it?
So what we're trying to some heat.
Well, this talk is about chaos. So,
How about that?
how about this? Yeah, that seems to
Okay,
work.
there we go. Fabulous. Sorry, guys, for the technical difficulties here.
Okay, so I hope you all like the beautiful, beautiful drawing that I made. Most everybody knows that John Megahan's drawing, and I do think it's beautiful, actually. Let me begin by thanking the Potawatomi, Odawa, Ojibwa, and Wendat Native Americans on whose land we have expropriated them and for whom we have not paid reparations up to the present time, and also the Mam, the Nawat, the Motocintlo, and the Tecos, which are the Native Americans on whose land, again, stolen by Europeans and not reparations not having been paid in the area that I work in Mexico. So this is just to orient you to the geographic position. Up there you have a map of Mexico. That's where Chiapas is. These are the native ranges of the folks in Chiapas. It's an area which has more native people than any other place in Mexico. And then this is just a topographic model of the state, where you can see one massive bunch of mountains up here, and a central valley, and then a bunch of mountains up here on the Pacific coast. We happen to work right here in the mountainous area in coffee production. This is a satellite image of the area that we work in general. And this is our main plot called the Azteca plot. Azteca is the name of the ant that we work with. This is 45 hectares. And this is the other plot that we work in. This is Hamburgo, and that's 35 hectares. This is, in general, this is an area of sort of more intensive coffee production. This is an area of much less intensive coffee production. This is organic. This is not organic. And then you can see here there's a forest preserve here, which is a pristine, if you like that word. Forest, and then there's a area here that kind of was coffee but was abandoned and is now second growth forest. It's about a 10-year-old second growth forest. If you look at I think the video is going to work there. I don't know how well it works for the folks on Zoom, but this is just a walk through the the farm, so you can see what it generally looks like. The coffee trees, these are coffee trees, are relatively dispersed out, and as you can see, there's a lot of shade trees in the system. It has a feeling of kind of a forest-like feeling to it. In the main Azteca plots, there's 11,000 trees that we have cataloged, and there's over 90 different species of trees in that 45-hectare plot. This is, for those of you who've been to my house, this is the garage of our house, and this is the photograph from which we painted that ant on our garage door. And when I sent this is Phil Ward took this photo. Phil Ward is sort of the guru of ant photography. I don't know if you knew there was a guru of ant photography, but anyway, he took this photo, and we did that from his photo, and I sent him a picture of our garage, and he's the one who put that high whitetail if I have an obsession with ants. So, I wonder if there's any way I can get that. I'm not going to try, okay, just so, could you try and ignore that black notice there? If I click on the X, I'm afraid I'll click everything out of there. Here's, you see the ant nest, and this is a shade tree, and you see a little carton that's on the outside of the shade tree. That sometimes the nest will put carton on the outside of the tree to expand the real estate a little bit. Not always, but sometimes. This is Yvette here, Yvette Perfecto, my colleague down here, illustrating how big this whole thing is. These are mainly all coffee bushes, and the idea is that the Azteca forages on all these coffee bushes in a diameter of approximately 10 meters. On the right-hand side, this is a picture of ants. This is my thumbprint right here. I smashed a bunch of ants, and just so you can see what happens. And I'm going to show you a video now. I hope it works. And you'll see the ants running around, and they're all very disturbed and everything because I just smashed them, obviously. But note the flies that are in the system. See the flies? The little black flies running around? See? 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 Everybody see the flies? Okay.
Yes.
So,
That's a question, Joe. How big are the coffee plants themselves? They're all pretty small, or do they?
well, when they're seedlings, they're about that big. When they get big, they get about that big.
Okay, so they stay about that big.
Well, they're managed. Okay, it's a managed system, so they like to manage them about that size, right? But frequently, their management system is not all that efficient, so they get pretty big sometimes.
Okay, thanks.
But usually not. Okay. So here's a blurry photo. I just expanded this from the video that I took. That's a forehead attacking the ant, and what the forehead does is the forehead lays an egg on the base of the head of the ant, and the larvae enter the head and they eat out the head capsule to the point where when the larvae is ready to hatch as an adult, why the ant's head falls off and the adult emerges from the head capsule. Yeah, it's pretty nasty. I agree. That's why these flies are called decapitating flies. Okay. Now I wish you could see that. Should I click on the X?
Yes.
All right. Who said that? Aaron, you said click on the X, right? So it's your fault if I lose everything here.
You have to click on the X.
Yeah, but I can't find my. I can't find my cursor. Is my cursor there?
Like that.
Where's my cursor?
Do you need help?
I can't find my cursor. Is there? Do you see my cursor there? Oh, there it is. It's just flying around. Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you for the advice. Okay, so the point is that the Azteca ant, symbolized by A, is eaten by the phorid parasitoid, symbolized by P. Okay, and everything here, I always symbolize my dynamical systems with a little ball at the end of the arrow indicating a negative effect and a little arrowhead indicating a positive effect. So here there's a positive effect of the Azteca on the forehead because it's the predator is getting energy, and a negative effect on the Azteca itself. Okay, so the Azteca is attacked by the predator, parasitoid phorid fly. That's one oscillatory system, predator-prey oscillatory system. This is the pest in the system that we're working with. This is the green coffee scale, Coccus viridis, and you can see down here more or less this typical population where you have adults, nymphs, and crawlers. The crawlers are the dispersal stage of scale insects, and they crawl around and eventually they get blown away by wind. Okay, now they themselves are attacked by a beetle. Here's the adult of the beetle, here's the larvae of the beetle. If you saw John Meganhead's beautiful painting, well, he actually has one of these in the painting. You probably didn't recognize it as a beetle, but that's what they look like. And so the beetle preys on the scale insect, so we have, again, scale insect preyed on by the beetle. We have another oscillatory predator-prey system. Then finally, we have a pathogen, a fungal pathogen, this white halo that you see around the scale insects here. Each one of these things is a scale insect, and there's a white halo of fungus around it. This is called the white halo fungus, Lecampsylium lecanii, but we'll just symbolize it as and S, so the fungus attacks the scale insects, again, with the appropriate arrow. So here's our system. I can't remember why I put this slide here. I'm just reminding you, I guess, where the Azteca plot is and the Hamburgo plot, 45 hectares, 35 hectares. Here is all, here's four of the system, all four parts of the system. You have the fungal pathogen, the ants, the beetle predator, the scales, and the phorid predator. Here you have the ant. Each circle represents a 20-meter diameter circle around a shade tree that has an ant nest inside of it, okay? There are approximately 700 of them right here. And like I said, I think I said this before, there's about 11,000 trees that they could occupy, but these are the ones that they actually do occupy. Then in all other cases, the circles are relative to the density, measured in a variety of different ways, the densities of the various other elements of the system. Scale insects and their two predators, and then the phorid predator on the Azteca. So these are those three predatory systems that I talked about, and then you have the same thing in the Hamburgo plot, the 35-hectare plot.
Sorry, John, the red dots are in...
I'm sorry, yes, thank you.
Dots are the Azteca nest?
Thank you for asking. These are the Azteca nests. These are the same as these, just not 20 meters, just showing you where they are. Okay, so now in the system, the other thing about it is that this is the ant, these are the ants crawling around on the outside of their nest. By the way, they sting. So if you come upon something like this, why, it's sometimes unpleasant. But here you see the ants tending the scale insects. Okay, now it's a classic mutualistic association between the scale insects and the ants. The scale insects produce a sugary substance called honeydew. The ants collect the sugary substance, and then they protect the scale insects. We won't talk about that too much right now, but the point is that the direct effect here is the scale insects produce sugar, the ants collect the sugar from the scale insects, okay? So what we actually have is we have the S, the scale insects, have a positive effect on the ants. There's a reciprocal effect, but we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, now the ant dissuades the beetle from eating the scale. Here's an old photograph that we have. I guess this is not all that easy to see, but here's an adult beetle, and it's being surrounded by and attacked by the ants. And what happens when an adult beetle comes on a coffee tree? Why, the ants, it comes on a coffee tree that's being protected by ants, okay? When the beetle gets attacked, the adult beetle gets attacked, and it either falls off the tree or it gets eaten by the ants, or it gets killed by the ants, one of the two. So the ant dissuades the beetle from eating the scale. So we have here the scale attacks the scale is attacked by the beetle, and then we add the ants to the system, and here a different kind of interaction now. We have it in orange here, but it's still a little ball indicating a negative interaction. The ant has a negative interaction on the beetle's negative interaction against the scale, right? So that's an indirect interaction, and mathematically speaking, it's a nonlinear interaction. At least that's the way I consider it. So the Azteca is attacked by the phorid fly, as I already pointed out. So that's the Azteca and the phorid. And then where am I going from this? And so here, you can see this better than you can see it in the video. This is a phorid attacking these Aztecas. And as you can see here, the Aztecas, all of them in this picture, not just the one under attack, but all of them in this picture, they're assuming this position like this. It's sort of a catatonic position. It turns out that the phorid flies can smell the ants, at least when they're releasing their alarm pheromones. And so the phorid fly can smell the ants, but it can't really attack one unless it sees it move. And so what these ants do is they assume this position, and then it's like they're catatonic. You know, it's really amazing to watch. All of them are like catatonic. They don't move. Here's a video that some of you have seen already, I know, but this was taken by Heidi Lair, which is a graduate student here. This is in a cage in the laboratory. This is an ant, and that's a phorid fly there. And you see the phorid knows that there's an ant there, but the ant isn't moving. So the phorid keeps coming back, keeps coming back, keeps coming back. Where's the ant? Where's the ant? I know there's an ant here somewhere, but it actually can't find the ant because the ant's not moving. As soon as that ant moves, the phorid comes in and zaps it with an egg, oviposites on its neck. Okay, so what that means is that the phorid interferes with the ant's ability to dissuade the beetle from eating the scale, right? So we have this condition here another orange indirect effect here. The forehead interferes with the ant's ability to interfere with the beetle's ability to interfere with the scale, okay? I'm really sorry I had this arrow going in the wrong direction. I always like to do that to confuse people. But this arrow is supposed to go in the other direction. I presume you've already seen that, okay? When that happens in the equations, actually, that really screws things up. Okay, so here we have the system again, but now adding all those interactions, we have the blue interactions, which are kind of the direct interactions, the predator, and then the scale feeding the Azteca with the sugar water, and then the indirect effects with the dashed red lines. And here's the same thing in the Hamburgo plots. Okay, so let me do. This is very elementary, I know, and I apologize for most of you, but we begin with some basic population ecology that we have the regular exponential equation, which we know applies to any population that happens to be growing, but we don't like it because that means that it'll grow like this forever and the bacteria will be covering the surface of the earth and all that. And we know that doesn't happen, so we have to do something. And basically what we've done is we add a fudge factor and we put an equation like that in with it, make it a quadratic term so that the ax squared controls the whole thing. But that brings us to the question, what do r and a mean, those two parameters in the system? We just reorganize them, they look like that, where what we've done is we let a equal r over k, and now we have our classic population ecology, intrinsic rate of natural increase in the carrying capacity of the environment. So that's that. Now, at the ESA meetings last summer, Little Bear, a Blackfoot Indian, gave this sort of, not commencement, I guess, but one of the big plenary addresses. And one of the things he said is that Western science is all about measurement. If it's not subject to measurement, it is not scientific. Blackfoot science, on the contrary, is all about relationships. If it is not about all my relations, it is not scientific. And this struck me when I heard this because I've been thinking along these terms, these equation type terms right here, and adding these fudge factors here like I've just done. I mean, that's kind of like doing what he said at the beginning here. Not exactly, but it's kind of like doing the same thing. But what I know about the system, this particular system that we're talking about, I know that those relationships are really important. As a matter of fact, I just mentioned that there's about 700 ant nests and about 11,000 trees where they could nest. I mean, I'm not sure what kind of density-dependent effect that really has. I'm not sure whether even this simple fudge factor here is all that important. But what I am sure of is that there are predator-prey relationships going on. So we come up with, I don't want to argue about this, so anybody who wants to disagree with me, please shut up. But this inspired me, by the way, to put this in this particular framework. Okay, so this is looking at the relationships that we know exist. Okay, and say, well, what can we do with them? Well, these are the classical egalitarian equations, and I think probably most everybody here knows. If you don't, I'll just quickly explain it. That if you take and you plot the prey down here and the predator up here, they're oscillatory. They oscillate like that or like that. But these oscillations are neutral. They're neutral in the sense that if you start right here, you go around and you wind up exactly here. If you start right here, you go around and you wind up exactly here again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are an infinite number of those little oscillations, and it means that wherever you start, okay, you're going to wind up at the same place. Well, that's kind of similar to what we began with the exponential equations. We don't like that because it doesn't seem to correspond to reality. And so we try to modify it. How do we modify it? Excuse me. I always forget to drink water. So how to modify it? Once again, we do what we frequently do. We add a fudge factor, okay? So take that equation, we add a fudge factor just like we did before. Fudge factor that equation, this f multiplies the quadratic term. And so doing a little bit of algebra, we get to that same thing that we had before. And we have a system of equations that works out really very nicely. So this no longer is neutral. But now what it does is if you plot it over time, the predator and prey go like this. But they go like this and they dampen. They always dampen to a particular point. So now here we are faced with the situation that the elementary approach to the equations tell us that there are no oscillations in nature, at least over the long haul. I believe that's a problem, since there are lots and lots of examples in nature where predators and prey, they do continue oscillating, maybe not in a terribly regular fashion, but they do continue oscillating over long periods of time. So this form of the equations does not correspond to qualitative reality. So how do we make the Lacca-Volterra oscillate again? Well, as we do, we add another fudge factor. So we add this fudge factor right here. This fudge factor represents something like the handling time of the predator or the predator's satiation in the whole system. And once we add that, then we get to the equations that are pretty much used by everybody these days. Excuse me. These equations. And this particular set of equations are known as the Rosenzweig-MacArthur equations, or the MacArthur equations, or the Holling equations, or something like that. But pretty much everybody uses these as a kind of an elementary framework of the whole thing. And we can, of course, look at my system from this point of view. But I'd like to try and not do that. I'd like to try and look at it from a more elementary point of view. Let's just begin with what we know is true, that the phorids eat the aztecas, the beetles eat the scales, and the fungus eats the scales, okay? Just that way. So if we forget about the fudge factors now and just do the Lacca-Volterra equations, first thing that we notice is that F and B cannot coexist. There are no way, under no circumstances can F and B exist in the same system. Now they can for a while, and if it's totally neutral, of course, you can make them coexist, but that's super artificial. So one or the other will have to be eliminated through competition, and that's what we're going to eliminate the fungus for now. I'll bring the fungus back in later, okay? But for now, we'll just look at these two equations. Okay, now they're separate equations. What we do know about the equations, though, is that S is connected with A, because S is the scale insect, A is the azteca, and S produces honeydew, sugar water, which A eats. Okay, so we know that there's a connection right there. Let's see, where am I going from here? Oh yeah, so this brings us to this marvelous paper by Aaron King, which he published many, many, many years ago when he was just a child. And basically what Aaron did was Aaron took your classical Lacca-Volterra predator-prey equations, and he said, well, we have another oscillator, and in his case he was using something like a seasonal oscillator, okay? So we can take a sine function or something like that to be pushing this system right here. Now what we have is something which, quite frankly, is mathematically very, very similar, if not exactly the same thing. But what we have is a system where we have a predator-prey oscillation which is pushing the predator-prey oscillation. This is called these are forced oscillators. Let's see, where am I going now? Okay, so, but the other thing that we have, in addition to this forced oscillator, we have these connectors here. So what we have oscillators, but the oscillators are coupled together. That is, in this case, why B and S feel nothing from P and A, nothing at all. In this case, B and S feel these effects from P and A. S affects P and A also. So the oscillators are not one pushing the other one, but the oscillators are together. They're being complicated. They're being coupled. This creates a lot of complications, okay? And people have studied this quite a lot in a variety of different fields. This is one paper that I personally think is really very classic, the coupled predator-prey oscillations in a chaotic food web by Elisa Benessa in Jeff Huysman's lab in the University of Amsterdam, and it's a great paper, and it talks about how you get all these complicated oscillations, chaotic oscillations that come from coupling the oscillators together like this. So I want to see if we can find if we can analyze our system in such a way using some of these other tools that people have used to understand at a qualitative level now. I want to emphasize that we have no idea. We have these parameters A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, and C. We have no idea what they are. I don't think there's any way in the world to actually estimate them quantitatively at all. I think that would be a wild goose chase entirely. But we do know qualitatively that they're there. Okay, where can we go with just knowing that they're there? Okay, everybody understands these graphs, I presume. Now I'm just going to draw these graphs in a slightly different way. Okay, so these are the same graphs. okay? They're just slightly different. As you can see, for the 5 variables, there's 5 equations, 5 differential equations, and then there's this one equation here which refers to the A and P interaction. The C in the equation refers to the the sugar water that's being given to the Azteca, and the F and AP relate P and A to the dynamics of the other equations. Okay. So when we do that, let's see, did I change something there? No. When we do that, we can now analyze the equations in this in a way that, in a classical way. If we just look at these equations right now, let me see if I change this a little bit. No. Okay, we'll look at these equations right now. What we can do is we can look at P and A as a function of S and B. Now, when they're completely uncoupled, okay, they're just independent oscillators at this point. Predator, prey here. They know nothing about one another. What we can do, just because it's possible to do, we can take and we can use S as a strobe light, so to speak. So when B and S are going like this, they're oscillating, right? And we can say every time S comes to the peak, shine a light on the PA system. So S comes to a peak, shine a light on P and A. S comes to a peak, shine a light. Comes to a peak, shine a light. Comes to a peak, shine a light. And so this is what we have up here, and I put it on a logarithmic basis. These are simulations of the equations. I put it on a logarithmic basis here. We have the prey on the x-axis, the predator. Oh, I'm sorry, that's supposed to be predator there. Well, it's another attempt on my part to confuse you. But so this is supposed to be a prey-predator graph, but it's the graph of the point of P and A at the strobe point of S, as S is peaked, all right? That's called the Poincare section. And so what might happen, so S peaks now, and where is P and A? Well, it might be there. Now S peaks again, where it might be there. S peaks again, well, it might be there. S peaks again, it might be there. And as you can see, what's happening, of course, is that since these are neutral oscillations, I've taken all those complications out of it, because they're neutral oscillations, why, what you're effectively doing is you're retracing the entire oscillation itself. Now, if it's not obvious, I'll just mention that this particular oscillation doesn't have to be there. It could be some other oscillation, depending on where you start this, but it will always be a loop. It will always be a loop. Now what happens when, it will reflect what one of these neutral oscillations was. It will be exactly what one of these neutral oscillations was. So we're not really doing much by doing the strobe technology, right? But what happens when we now couple the equations like that, whether we force the AP equations with the S? Well, when we do that, this Poincare section turns into this, in this particular example, okay? And as you can see, there are basically 2 blobs of points. Now, those blobs of points, they're not particular points. As a matter of fact, there's an infinite number of those points within each of those blobs, and they're called invariant loops, is what they're called. And in those invariant loops, we know is that as S and B are going around, why P and A are going to the one on the left, then to the one on the right, then to the one on the left, then to the one on the right. In other words, the phase of this system, the way it's working now, is with reference to S and B, is related to S and B in 2, right? There's 2 oscillations of P and A versus every single oscillation of S. So, but where you go within that blob is unpredictable. So how does this play out if we sort of try and do that experiment for every single one of these oscillations? How does that whole thing play out? And what that does is these oscillations, they start looking like something like this, okay? So with these initial conditions, I've started out with A and P at 10, 11, 12, 13, up to 21. And these are the patterns that emerge. So the blue ones here, this one and that one, those are the ones I showed you before. The little black blobs that I showed you, now they're blue blobs. And now you can see why they're called invariant loops, because they are little loops, right? You couldn't see it on previous graphs because the graph was too small. So what happens with the system, it goes from here to here to here to here, but each time it's somewhere on this loop, and somewhere on this loop, but not exactly clear where. So its phase is going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, but where it is in its amplitude is actually different each time, and where it is in its amplitude is actually fairly unpredictable, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So, and what I've done here, just for the fun of it, I've sketched in what the original oscillations were for 2 of these things. So with the gray one, for example, watch what happens with this gray oscillation when I remove it. As you can see, what I get is these 5 blobs. With this orange oscillation, if I remove it, what I get are 7 blobs. But they're all where the oscillation was, right? Okay. Where am I going now? So back to this. This is what I get. This is the when I add the connection here. What happens when I add A to the system? Okay, now looking at this, so we went here from no connection. Here was the force oscillator from S. Now we're going to look at connecting with just A to B. And now probably you can look at this graph and you can probably tell me what you think is going to happen, and you probably would be right. None of this is really rocket science when you get right down to it. But if you do that, what happens is this graph turns into looking like that. In other words, the oscillations are they're spreading out. And they're spreading out infinitely. Okay, this adds to the system, this adds an instability to the system. So what were these nice regular oscillations from here to here to here to here, now all of a sudden are from here to 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 here, like that. They're very chaotic looking, but they're always increasing. Okay, so we're back to like an exponential equation moving out at the speed of light to infinity, right? Like I said, you can probably see why that happens here. A is controlling B, B is the only thing controlling S, and S is giving sugar water to A, which means that A is growing, but P then grows and nothing controls P, so it just goes on and on and on and on. So it's not really surprising that it works the way it does. But now what happens if we put this next one in, and again, probably most of you can see what's going to happen, but here's a little bit of a surprise because you probably won't anticipate what actually does happen. What happens is, depending on when you add B2, and in this particular case I added B2 at exactly that point, what happens is the whole system becomes controlled, but not controlled in any kind of regular way. The blobs are gone, well, not completely gone, I'll show you in a minute. The blobs are gone, but what you have is a chaotic system, but it's controlled in sort of a donut-shaped area. Okay, so that's what you get out of that system. Okay, now how am I doing? Trying to look at my time here. I can't. Oh, there's the clock right there. Okay, so now adding another component to the whole thing, and this is, again is looking at it from a qualitative point of view. Back in the 90s, Don Strong, some of you know Don, Don suggested that all of the debate about density independence or density dependence, which was a huge debate back in the day, all of that was missing one point, missing the point that there are some populations that are neither density independent nor density dependent, but they're density vague. It's not clear whether they're really density independent or whether they're controlled somehow or another. And I don't want to deal with that very much, but I will like to deal with this particular paper by Wayne Getz, which was published about the same time. And in this particular paper, Wayne was suggesting that there's a breakpoint, as opposed to somehow being a continuous relationship between whether you're density independent or density dependent, which would be like the Lacke-Volterra equations or the logistic equation. What happens is populations are exponential density independent up to some critical transition. At the critical transition, then they become density dependent. I happen to think that he's right, at least about a lot of populations, but I want to ask the question, what happens when we look at my framework here from this point of view? So here's the original Lacke-Volterra oscillations. This would be the prey isocline here going through the equilibrium point. There would also be a predator isocline straight up here, but I haven't sketched that in at all. But now what does Wayne say? Wayne says that there's some density down here on the level of the prey which changes that relationship, but it changes it in a critical fashion. So there's a point here that If you're to the left of this point, why it's independent, you just do what this says here. But if to the right of this point, why the isocline changes, and so the isocline looks like that. And this then would be the prey isocline. A point here, it's not a curve, it's a point, and now it goes down. So what dynamically happens when you do that? Again, qualitatively, I think you can see. Here, if your vectors here, if there's no density dependence at all, you just follow any one of these blue lines, blue curves. But if it's not that way, you follow curves like this. That is, you're moving in towards the equilibrium point until you hit the density abruptness line. That's what I call it anyway, the density abruptness line. At that point, now you start going along one of the blue curves. And you go along that blue curve until you get to the density abruptness point again. Now you might go past it, at which point you're going to come back into it. Okay, I hope you can see at least that you wind up going on a circle like this, but each time you're out here, you're moving inside. So ultimately, you're going to have a curve like that. That looks like a limit cycle. It's not exactly the same as a limit cycle, but it looks very much like a limit cycle. Now add to this now the qualitative nature of coupling these things together, and now instead of having these blue lines, we have all of these blobs. And that means, I say, what that means is that if you put these blobs in here, that means that what you're going to have, instead of this red circle right here, you're going to have one of these blobs, one of these circles here with the blobs. So for example, this might be the one. If this is the cycle that sort of hits this point right here, ultimately, when it's connected then, when it's pushed by the other cycle, it's going to look like this. And what you have are 5 blobs, as you can see right here. And so the dynamics of the system is going to be like that. You go from this blob to that blob, then from that blob to that blob, from that blob to that blob, and then back to that blob. 5 cycles, right? It's always 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 in perpetuity. Always 5, 5, 5. But each time you hit it, you're at a different place. So you hit this every 4th time, let's say, you hit this blob right here, but sometimes you're way up here, sometimes you're way down here. So there's an amazing structure to the system, which might not be too easy to see, but it's a real structure to the system which kind of controls the system, but very much in this pattern where you have 5, 5, 5, 5, but the peaks then change, and the peaks change chaotically. This then reminds me of a paper that was published in 1999 by Bernd Blasius and Louis Stone, which was an analysis of the lynx hair system. And what they figured out with the lynx hair system in Canada is, yes, it has a 10-year cycle, and every 10 years you get a peak. Every 10 years you get a peak. So the phase is very, very consistent every 10 years. But if you look at the peaks, where the peaks go, the amplitude is, and they did a careful analysis to show this was true. I think, at least I agree with their analysis, that the peaks themselves are chaotic. And so they labeled this kind of system, they labeled this the UPCA pattern. It's the uniform phase chaotic amplitude pattern. And what I'll argue here, I don't know if you all agree with me, but what I'll argue here is kind of a qualitative generalization of how this uniform phase chaotic amplitude can emerge. Because this picture here is uniform phase chaotic amplitude. Pretty cool, huh?
Yes.
That's the response I get from my students also when I say pretty cool, huh? Okay, so let me go back to this point. This is superimposing now. Well, let me go back here. This is what I just had on the screen. Now superimposing that structure where we had all of these things together, that structure actually looks like this. And now here's what I mentioned earlier, but I didn't say too much about it. You can see a kind of a congregation around those blobs, right? Not so much up there, but right down through here, you can see a congregation around those blobs. So those gray points, which are pretty much controlled, they're like in a donut-shaped area, but not predictably where they're going to be in the donut-shaped area, you can still see where those blobs used to be. So it's all chaotic where you're going to go, but it has this kind of an underlying structure to it based on where the invariant loops had been before you added that third interaction there. So finally, where am I going with this now? Remind you that all of this, I think, is based on what we observe in nature. Now, what happens when you put, now remember, I took the F out of the system, right? I took the fungus out of the system because I said it would compete with the bee, so it would not be in there. But once you get the beetle and the scale and the phorid and the ant doing their thing, all this chaos and everything like that, now you put the phorid back in, or the fungus back in, and you get, perhaps not surprisingly, but this is that's the fungus, beetle, and scale in a time series, obviously from a computer simulation. And this is the ant and phorid, which looks fairly regular also, but you will note where the peaks are. And the peaks are not in the same area. I suppose I should have a graph just showing the peaks themselves. But this is a classic case of a uniform phase chaotic amplitude system, right? The ant phorid system is uniform phase chaotic amplitude. Here, just briefly to show you how that actually does work, those 5 points are those 10 points that I have circled in that predator-prey loop there. They move in this direction. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the next cycle around, they move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 continues around and around and around, never reaching the same point, by the way, but eventually creating that whole cycle. So now, one more thing before I quit. And I hope this isn't too boring for you, but I think it's very exciting. But the one thing that comes to mind now, and what some of you might be thinking, well, if this is where it should be, this is where we expect it to be, but only if we start out here, right? So what happens if we just start in here? Does that old problem with the neutrality happen? So if we start here, we're just going to go around there all the time. We start here, we go around there all the time. And only if we start out here do we get controlled by this abruptness factor. And, well, maybe that's true, but I don't think it is, because now if we add a stochastic factor to the system, and this is my way of trying to illustrate to you what a stochastic factor actually does, if that's the point we're concerned with, now when the system is at that point, now we perturb it stochastically. That means that if this circle right here is to give an idea of where the stochastic perturbations will be. Okay, if you do 1,000,000 perturbations, why, they'll be within this circle somehow or another, let's say. What you'll notice is that this area right here, the area outside of the circle, is much bigger than the area inside of the circle. Which means that if you're close to the equilibrium point right here, there's a stochastic force that's pushing you out. And actually, Aaron made this point in an article a really long time ago, I think when he was a kid, that weakly dissipated predator-prey systems do actually do this. He pointed out stochastic perturbations can bounce the system from one basin to another with consequent change in system behavior, which is true, but given this bias of the predator-prey system, why bouncing means bouncing on average, mainly bouncing in that direction. Okay, sometimes in that direction, but mainly bouncing in that direction. Which means that we have, qualitatively speaking, now none of this is quantitative, it's all qualitative. Qualitatively speaking, we have the density dependence out here pushing the system to a limit right here, and so it'll always go to a limit right here, but if it ever gets inside of this limit, there's a stochastic process that's pushing it out towards that limit. So what we expect then is kind of a cloud, a donut-shaped cloud, where we shall always find the system. It will always be oscillatory. Frequently, I would argue that it will be phase consistent, but amplitude chaotic. And I guess I was going to tell you some other really cool stuff, but I don't have time. So this is just the most recent group that works with us in Mexico. So thank you for listening. Nick?
This is an ant question.
Cool.
Can you go back to the slide?
This one? What? Well, where we're going next, and if you'd like to come to our lab meeting on Thursday, I'm going to talk about this next in the lab meeting. But the idea is this whole idea of diffuse competition, which MacArthur laid out in this book and has not actually been talked about very much since the time he laid it out. But the idea is that if you have a little maple seedling that big and it's in the middle of the forest at the George Reserve, it doesn't really know that under an oak tree or it's under another maple tree or whatever. So, but it's definitely getting competition. So the competition is diffuse with regard to all the other systems, other elements in the system. These are the ants we encountered in last summer in 5 different subplots that we had, and this is the group that we encountered. And my argument is that they're all together, they're diffuse competition with one another, and then there's a dominant competitor, the Azteca, which the dynamics of which are more complicated, as I just showed you. And then going back to Darwin's famous thought experiment, if you mow, when you have a dominant competitor, when you mow, that reduces the effect of the dominance of the competitor. That's what I was going to say.
Dinah Davidson has an ant paper on diffuse competition.
I'm sorry?
Dinah Davidson?
Yeah, I know. Yep. I don't want to concentrate on that slide, actually. I was going to tell you something about that, but I didn't have time.
Question.
Yeah.
So one of the last slides talking about that tendency for dissipative force, I'm just wondering how you think that relates in any way at all, if it does, to if populations are too small, they might go to extirpation for lots of reasons. So that dissipative outward force, yeah, how does it relate?
Well, in my way of thinking for this seminar, it doesn't relate at all. But you bring up a good point about real nature, okay? That I'm a big fan of, and I think is very important. The whole question of the Ali effect, and so none of these things will actually coexist. It will actually be successful unless they're beyond the Ali point. And so, if you want, I mean, I can sort of think about that, or you yourself can think. Since you brought it up, I imagine you already can see what would happen if you have an Ali point low on either the predator or the prey. Well, you're going to constrain the system away from zero. But that's not part of this at all. Okay? And somebody else had a question over here, I thought. No? Oh, Luis?
This is an uncharacteristic question, but you have this great model that describes some really interesting dynamics. What happens out there?
This is what happens out there.
Behaviors don't, right?
I mean, the philosophy of this, I hope I was successful in promoting, is I don't think that it makes any sense to try and do this very quantitatively. We have a lot of quantitative data, but in terms of the number of ant nests and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that having worked on this system for 20 years now, I do understand what the qualitative properties of it are. And what the message that I'm trying to get across here is understanding just the qualitative nature allows us to make some, not predictions really, but allows us to make some generalizations about how systems as a whole might function. And the mathematics, which are very primitive, as I'm sure you recognize, the mathematics go along with what Richard Levins has often said, the use of mathematics to educate the intuition. Okay, now my intuition began with observation in nature, just saying what those connections really are. And I'm totally convinced that those connections are real, qualitatively speaking. And then from that, I went to the basic ecological theory to say, well, if I know those connections are real, what does the ecological theory say might be the limitations of what I'm going to look at, And then from the equations, why it seems to me why I'm explaining what I see actually in nature. Now, you could criticize that. Maybe I can't tell by the look on your face because you have your mask on, but you could criticize that, and I think that there is a legitimate criticism of that. De Santos, the famous Portuguese geographer, has a magnificent critique of elementary classical economics, as a matter of fact. Elementary classical economics, which looks at economic behavior, devises equations, the equations correspond to the behavior. And he refers to that as what I can't remember the name, but it's, ceremonial adequacy. Okay, and so what I've actually said is I looked at nature, I devised some equations. The equations, the mathematics gives me intuition about nature, and yes, what I observed does make sense. All right, I would say that one could criticize me. I hope you won't, but you could. You could say, well, that's nothing but ceremonial adequacy. It's not real science, it's ceremonial adequacy. So that's what I would have said if I were you. Jake?
So this might be my ignorance. I like this notion that you add stochastic dynamics and it'll push the system a certain way, but you assume that the stochastic is that circle around it. Why wouldn't stochastic nature push, like already have? Why does it have that distribution necessarily? Is that inherent in the system, or is that just you making a circle?
And that's a super good question, and that brings us to the whole problem with stochastic models in general. A stochastic model is not the stochastic model. There's a whole variety of them, and this particular one assumes that with regard to these two variables, directionality does not vary with regard to the two variables. You could argue, as you sort of seemingly did right there, that stochasticity will be far less going that way than it is going that way, internal to what the stochastic process actually is responding to. And that might be true. I take this, and this might be wrong on my part, but I take this as kind of being the underlying, I hate to say it, but it's sort of the neutral model of if you don't want to make a hypothesis about what the stochastic processes are doing dynamically, why this is about the best way to do it. Now, you can make the circle not a circle, you can make an oblong, or this way or this way. This same argument applies to that kind of thing. But I think what you're suggesting is that the stochastic process itself might be moving in the opposite direction, and that's certainly true. Okay, I'll stay here as long as you want me to.